Charles Atlas, the man, the legend, the greatest comic book ad campaign of all time. What am I talking about? Stay tuned to find out. Welcome to Ras Retro Comics. In previous episodes, when I go through some of my older comics, you may have noticed that I pause sometimes at the ads. I just find them interesting, fascinating, a snapshot of the time, whenever that comic book was published. And so recently, I had purchased an old issue of Wings Comics. This is number 29, published in January 1943. And when I looked at the back, I noticed an ad for Charles Atlas. And I thought, wow, I had never realized that this ad campaign was this old in comic book history. After doing a little more digging, I found out that actually he had published ads in the 1930s in magazines and graduated to comic books in the 1940s. But you can find some of his ads as recent as 1983 and probably more recent. So that's 40 plus years that this ad campaign has survived in comic books. So the classic ad, the strip, where he's shown on the beach getting bullied by another person, is something that happened to him in real life. And after that incident, he vowed that this was never going to happen again. So he found out about training. From observing different bodybuilders in terms of how they exercised and how they ate, and then developed his own program from that. And obviously it became very successful because an ad campaign lasting 40 years is testament to that. It's amazing to think that actually these ads transcended advertising and took a life of their own. And this happened in the 90s when Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely produced this wonderful miniseries called Flex Mentallo. And it's an obvious spoof of Charles Atlas. And what's really interesting about this, it's a wonderful read, although a bit challenging at times because it's very quite surreal, is that the Charles Atlas company, they actually sued DC because of copyright infringement. And for a period of time, because of the copyright status was in limbo, that the 4-issue series was actually highly sought after because they thought it was never going to be reprinted again. Interestingly, though, this would not be the first time that a character like Charles Atlas would appear in comic books. For that, you'd have to go into the Twilight Zone. Okay, let's take a look at what's in the box. So this is issue number 88 of The Twilight Zone, published by Gold Key. The case came out in 1978, and it's based on, loosely based, the stories are loosely based on the TV series. And in this particular issue, it's a copy of essentially taking the next step of the Charles Atlas story further, with a Twilight Zone twist, of course. The first few panels are a direct copy of the ads. Here you have the bigger guy kicking sand on this couple, the skinny guy saying, "Hey, jerk, watch what you're doing." And then the bigger guy, being, not a nice guy. So what happens next? This piece of paper magically flies in this guy's face, and it's an ad, like the Charles Atlas ad. And he decides, okay, you know what? I'm going to give it a shot. And he gets these dumbbells in the mail, and just from lifting that, he becomes this big, buff guy. If I can pause for a second here, this is also really kind of weird. Here you have an ad featuring Captain Marvel, a Marvel character, in a Gold Key book. That's really strange. And all of a sudden he becomes this super jack guy, but with great power maybe comes great responsibility, but he becomes like a jerk. Whereas his girlfriend preferred that he's this kind of, sensitive, nice guy, because he's been pushed over so many, he's been pushed around for so long. He goes, you know what? I'm just going to do my own thing. People become scared of him. And then what happens is when he looks in the mirror, he realizes, oh man, my muscles are still growing. I gotta stop this. So he goes back and he breaks the tool, and that breaks the spell, apparently. And he's back to his normal skinny self again. And so a few days later, a similar thing happens, and what he does is, to his girlfriend's happiness, is he handles the situation in a calm and intelligent manner, and it works out for him. So there you go. I guess muscles don't mean everything. I also want to show one example of the ads from the 50s, and certainly the ads themselves have kind of evolved over time. You didn't see the "Hey skinny, your ribs are showing" kind of ads later on in the 60s and the 70s, but this is the classic ad of Charles Atlas, and I just think it's really kind of cool. And this I found in an old issue of Journey into Unknown Worlds published in 1954. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Something a little different. Certainly, it's rare when you have characters in ads actually transcend the ads themselves and become characters of their own in comic books. I highly recommend that Flex Mentallo series. It really pokes a lot of fun at comic book ads and comic book collecting in general, or even collectors. Check that out if you can. And until next time, read some more comic books.